And welcome. It's Monday. Welcome to the Deal Doctor live stream. I'm Don Phelan. Thanks for joining. Today we've got a couple of things I'd like to share with you that might make your job a little easier. We're always in our management groups trying to find ways to help the agents do their job easier, not let something slip through the cracks, to answer questions before the question is asked. So I want to share a couple of things. And you'll find these, by the way, the first couple of them, you're going to find them on the 5-Star Classroom site. If you're not a member of that already, please join. Anyone is welcome, and you do pick up a lot of really good information there. So this is a seller checklist, and it starts out, this one I think was created by Paul, and maybe Kim, I'm not 100% sure, but it's great. It's like, before you list, here's the things you do before you list. You create a CMA, you create a marketing plan, seller net sheet, and so on. Then here are all the documents that you're going to need in the process of listing the home. Obviously, you got to create a loop in dotloop. You got to have the listing agreement. You got to pull that up and pull that into the loop. Showing time information, lead-based paint, seller's disclosure. So all of the documents that you're going to need to list a house are listed for you there, so you don't miss anything. Again, a little check mark, and you've got it. Then you can order photos, send Carfax, put your yard sign in, put your lockbox on, all of those things that we do. I post post on the multiple listing, and I post it, and then I share that post on Facebook and my Facebook business page, on Twitter, all the social media that I'm a part of. And so I instantly get the word out once that listing is up that I have this listing and whether there's an open house and all of that. Then you actually sell the house. What an idea. And here's all the stuff you're going to have to do when you pend a house, when you have to mark it as pending. One of the things is turn off showing time, unless you want to keep getting bombarded with showings on a very active listing. Submit for review in dotloop. Submit it for review, all of the documents you have signed at that time, so that our administrative team, our BAs, can look at that and say, do we have all the documentation that we need here in order for this file to close? Sometimes you might be missing something that you forgot, and we can catch that way in advance of the closing. Same goes for lending. You're going to have to call the lender and make sure that the lender has ordered the appraisal. Check on the loan status. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. If you're a listing agent, don't sit back and not ask what's the appraisal status, what's the loan status, where do we sit at this point? I do once a week. And sometimes agents feel as though that's pestering them, but I feel as though that's my due diligence for my seller, is to get the information about the process of the loan. Send seller settlement statement, then schedule closing, have sellers cancel utilities or transfer utilities, and so on. So all of this is really, really good stuff. And then it goes post-closing. Add the listing to your Zillow profile. Remove the sign. I can't tell you how many times that I've, in my own career, have gotten a call from a buyer who said, Don, I think you forgot your sign out here. It's been a few times, maybe half dozen, maybe a dozen. Anyway, sometimes you actually forget to go out and get your sign. So this little checklist is a really cool deal. And I hope that it helps you make your job easier and helps you not allow things to fall through the cracks. For example, notes, purchase price, closing date, EMD amount, possession. Have we received a copy? If you're a listing agent, have you received a copy of the EMD? Do you know that it's been accepted or received by the buyer's agent's office? So really great stuff. This is something that you should have for every single file. Every file, you should load this up, and whether you work on this electronically or manually, it's a tremendous help. And Paul and whoever worked on this, thank you. This is really, really a great piece. Now, Kim worked on one called the Listing to Close checklist. And that's along the same sort of line, but again, it kind of walks you through all of the stuff that you're supposed to do when you create your loop and dot loop, get maps, utility costs, condo bylaws, all of that stuff. They're both great forms to have. You may choose to use one over the other. And so you're welcome to do either of those. But they're both really, really good forms to keep you on track, make sure that you haven't forgotten something in the process. Then there's this really long one. And this is one that I would recommend that you keep nearby. Keep it in a folder in your briefcase, in a document file of some sort, because it's Kim has one for GCAR. We're going to be sharing these. These are in the process of being proofread by Greg and Paul and Eric, in addition to Kim and myself, so that we have all of the information, that the information is accurate, that we're giving you the right advice, and we don't have a bunch of typos and look silly. So this one is for the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, which we use on GRAR, WMLAR, and some other areas. If you have, let's say, the TAR form or one of the other forms, and you want us to do this kind of summary, please send it to me so we can go through that purchase agreement, just like we have for this West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement and for GCAR. Kim has the one for GCAR right now. So we're trying to do this so that all of our agents have a ready resource that they can go to and say, what do I do first? Well, let's start at the top of the form. At the top of the form, it says you got to fill in the date, the time, the form, the multiple listing number, choose and assign a form number in the right-hand corner. For example, 123 PA Purchase Agreement. Now, we're not in Grand Rapids required to do that. In other markets, they do. They have to assign a number to that form. You're free to use your own system for coding, if that's whatever that is. But it's kind of handy to have that number so that you can refer to it, so you can file according to it. Again, we're not required on GRAR or WMLAR, to my knowledge, to have that form or to have that number. The effective date. This is one. Wow. In fact, I got this question just the other day from an agent who's been in the business for 40 years. And he said, what's the effective date? And I said, What do you mean? What's the question you're at? What's the real question you're asking? He says, well, when does the inspection start? When does the inspection clock start? And I answered that the very first paragraph of the purchase agreement deals with the effective date. It identifies and defines what the effective date is. And that is the day that buyers and sellers reach a meeting of the minds, whether it is the seller accepting the buyer's offer as is or the buyer accepting the seller's counteroffer. An acknowledgement of that offer, either way, is not required in order to have a binding enforceable agreement. And the date at which those buyers and sellers agree is the effective date. So let's pretend it's today, the 20th, right? 19th. We 19th? Okay. So anyway, tomorrow, if the buyers and sellers agreed today to the terms of the contract, not talking about the acknowledgement, but only the terms of the contract, if they agreed today, then tomorrow would be the first full day of inspections within the 10-day. They get 10 full days of inspections under the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement. So it's a lot shorter the way I wrote it there, but it essentially says what I just told you. Paragraph 2, agency disclosure. We talk about agency disclosure throughout and how important it is to stay in the seller's position if at all possible. But if you absolutely positively have no choice to go into the dual agency position, you have to disclose that and get the permission of both buyer and seller prior to an offer being presented to your seller. So I urge you to get this and read through it so that you have a clear understanding of where our agency responsibilities lie. Seller's disclosure statement. In the seller's disclosure statement, I think one of the things that I want to make very clear is that the seller's disclosure statement does not require the seller to sign it in order to have an enforceable contract. That's a myth. The only thing that signature does, the buyer's signature does at the bottom of the seller's disclosure, is it acknowledges that the buyer has received that seller's disclosure. Once that seller's disclosure has been received by the buyer, they have 72 hours or 120 hours if their notice is delivered by postal mail to terminate the contract. They don't terminate the contract simply by not signing the seller's disclosure form. They can only terminate the contract using the seller's disclosure form by actively writing out an addendum and submitting it to the seller listing agent and saying, buyer withdraws and terminates offer based on information found in the seller's disclosure form. And they have a limited time to do that, 72 hours to 120 hours, depending on the nature of the notification. So I want to just make that very clear. I get that question a lot. You know, does the buyer didn't sign the seller's disclosure form, therefore we don't have a contract. No, you still do. The buyer had a responsibility, if they didn't like what was on the seller's disclosure form, to get out of the contract, to terminate the contract, and that time probably went by quite a long time ago. While I'm on seller's disclosure forms, we're finding a lot of sellers who have not updated their seller's disclosure form when there has been new information. A recent example was that a tenant experienced a fire, a kitchen fire, during the period of possession after the closing, but before the new buyer took possession. Now, obviously, the new buyer had owned the property at closing, but during that period of time that the tenant had tenant's rights to live there, there was a fire. Well, nobody disclosed that to the buyer. The problem we have here is that, first of all, the insurance company that should have covered the damage, if I'm understanding this correctly, and I may not, so if the agent involved wants to correct me, please do. But the insurance company that covered the damage should have been the new buyer's insurance company, not the previous owner's insurance company. So if they had been, the buyer would have been informed, advised that a fire had occurred and that they would be aware of it. Well, they weren't made aware of it, not by the tenant nor by the previous owner. And when the tenant moved in, there was, it smelled like smoke. It smelled stale. It smelled like somebody had sprayed a fire hose and left it to mildew on the kitchen floor, on the kitchen carpeting. So I caution you, as a listing agent, that if you know that there's been a conditional change in the property, if there's been a change of some condition, whether it's by a storm, whether it's by rain and a flood, no matter what it is, if there's something that has occurred to that property during the period of the listing or as it's pending, you have to make the buyer aware of that change. The seller has a responsibility to fill out a new disclosure form. And if they don't do that, and you, as a listing agent, simply turn and look the other way, well, ultimately that buyer would have rights to come back on both Five Star as well as the prior owner, the seller. So again, be careful. Make sure those seller's disclosure forms are filled out properly and updated if necessary. Gosh, there's just so many things here. We ran into this one last week. A lot of agents. There's a whole bunch of talk in here about contingencies and what contingencies are. And I'm going to cover a couple of them very briefly. On the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, you will see 3 boxes under contingencies. Contingencies as it regards the sale of a house. Now, number 1 is it's not contingent on the sale of any other home. That's the number 1. That's the short one. That's the easy one. The second one is contingent upon the closing of an existing sale. In other words, they have an offer. They've presented a copy of that offer to the seller in the process of negotiation, so they know that that property is on its way to a closing, and they accept an offer based on that existing offer. The third one is where we run into the most problem, and that says that the seller, that the offer is contingent upon the sale and closing of the property, and that the property will remain on the market until the buyer delivers an underlying sale, which is, by the way, not contingent. In other words, they can't simply deliver another offer on their property, which is contingent upon the listing and selling of another house, because that is not that's not an end to the contract. That we still have dominoes in play there. So until they deliver an offer, an underlying offer on their property to the subject property seller, that house is active on the market and can be sold at any time to any other buyer. It's very clear. Now, some agents put in there that they give the buyer, that the seller is going to give the buyer 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever to remove that contingency in the event another offer comes in. Well, talk to your MLS. I think what you'll discover, I know what you'll discover, is that they will perceive that that is a right of first refusal, and you have created an unlevel playing field by saying that this property is going to remain active and available to all agents, when in fact it's not. It's not, because there's one agent, one buyer, who has a right to first refuse to move forward and remove their contingency. And that one buyer has essentially more rights than any other buyers out there. For example, you sell a house for $200,000, subject to the sale and closing of the underlying property. And the listing agent gives, and the seller give the buyer 24 hours to remove that contingency in the event another offer comes in. A few days pass, another offer comes in. Cash, no inspections, $275,000, no appraisal, and we'll throw in some more goodies just to make it ridiculous. But the point is, that $275,000 offer cannot be accepted if that first buyer at $200,000 with the right to remove the contingency exercises that contingency and says, oh yeah, we'll pull our contingency and proceed directly to close. You just cost your seller $275,000 or $75,000 by allowing that contingency. They couldn't accept an offer that was $75,000 higher than the one that they had given preferential treatment to at $200,000. I know it's a hard concept to grasp, but we cannot give a right of first refusal and say that it's still active on the market, because those are in direct conflict with one another. They are, in the WMLAR multiple listing, they are required to be put on as active contingent, and on GRAR they are supposed to be put on as pending, status marked as pending. So that's a really, 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 really big thing that we really need to grasp, and make sure that we don't run into a problem with that, because it could end up in a huge lawsuit. Gosh, what else? So again, we're going to make these available. They're not available at this moment, but very soon, as soon as everybody's had an opportunity, Greg and Eric and Paul and Kim, to take a look at them and say, yeah, it's good. Well, actually, Kim and I have, so it's just Eric and Paul and Greg. So if they take a look at them, we're going to make them available. You're going to find it to be, I think, very helpful when you're filling out an offer, that you've marked all the boxes and checked all the bases, and I hope it helps a great deal. Again, if you have questions, Eric and I are on the phones. As you have figured out by now, if you've called us, the 490 number gets split into two individual numbers, and Eric and I, whichever one gets to the phone quicker, he seems to have a little more quicker reflexes than I do. That's my story. Anyway, but whoever gets to the phone is who you're going to have contact with. If you want to talk to one of us, or we have an ongoing situation that we've been working on together, we do have our own individual phone numbers, and let's just give you those right now. if you have a pen handy, or if you don't, maybe Dom can actually type them in. What do you think, Dom? Is that possible?
I'll put it in a comment.
Oh, cool. Okay, here goes. Deal Dr. Don is 616-438-3266. And Deal Dr. Eric is 616-826-9622. Put those in your phones as Deal Dr. Don or Deal Dr. Eric. And then the other one is Deal Dr. General. That's the 616-490-0902 number. And then that comes in and actually gets split off to both of us so that we have an opportunity to, whoever's available, to grab the call for you. So if there's a way we can help you improve, make it easier, better, please let us know. And I hope you have a great week. Get out there and sell some real estate. Thanks for joining.